Again, thank you all for being here today. I spoke too soon. All right, so we already did our introductions. We're going to go over the project, Summit's whole project in general, then give an overview of the process itself of environmental review and kind of where we're at. Talk a little bit about what a DEIS is. I think most of you know, but always good for the reminder. Then we're going to look specifically at what's in Summit's DEIS, and then we're going to end up with how to write a good comment. And I forgot a bullet, but how to submit that well-written comment. And this is the most amount of fun I could have with that picture because it's just the title page of the DEIS. So I think, again, most of you already know, but this is the project we're talking about. So it's Summit's Midwest Carbon Express. They've called it themselves the world's largest CO2 pipeline. It's going to be an interstate pipeline crossing Iowa, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, and of course, Minnesota. Approximately 2,000, I think it's up to 2,200 miles now, and it's going to cost about $5.5 billion. So all of this pipeline connects to primarily ethanol facilities. There's more than 30 overall across the whole network. But in Minnesota, it's about 240 miles in 3 branches. So the one from Fergus Falls to the North Dakota border, then from the Atwater facility in Kandiyohi County down to Jackson County in the Iowa border, and then also from the Iowa border up into Martin County towards Fairmont. So it's 6 ethanol facilities overall in Minnesota. And you'll see this darker blue pipeline as well, but that was Navigator's Heartland Greenway, and that was canceled in October of last year. So this is going to be a little bit more detailed, but here's the pipeline route permitting process. So when somebody submits an application for a pipeline route to the Public Utilities Commission, this is one of the ways the process can move forward. So it starts with an application for that route permit. So the application is submitted, there's a comment period, and then the Public Utilities Commission will issue a determination on whether or not that application is complete. Has it checked off all the boxes that our statutes say that application has to have? So in this case, the commission said, yes, Summit's application is complete, but we're also going to order the most robust type of environmental review, which is an environmental impact statement. And that's what really kicked off what we're talking about today, environmental review. So that process started with the publication of a draft EAW, or an environmental assessment worksheet, and a draft scoping decision. So a scoping decision just says, what does the end environmental impact statement have to include to be complete? So the Public Utilities Commission at this point, last May, held an open comment period for the public, and then also held meetings up in Fergus Falls and in Breckenridge. After comments were collected there, the Department of Commerce, which is doing the environmental review process for the Public Utilities Commission in this case, issued its final recommendation for scoping, and the Public Utilities Commission accepted that pretty much as is. So then that kicked off the second part of this environmental review process, which is really getting into the EIS. So that's where we kind of are today, kind of between these two. The draft EIS was issued on January 23rd, and we're now in the comment period, and there's some public meetings. That's why I'm up in Fergus Falls today, tomorrow, and Thursday. So once these meetings are done, and once the comment period has closed, which we will get to in a second, the Department of Commerce will again kind of compile all those comments and then draft, finally write up that final EIS. There'll be another opportunity for public hearings and public comment, but the question there is really, is the final EIS adequate? That's the word the law uses, and it just says, does the final EIS do all the things we said it was going to do in the scoping document? You'll see there's also this administrative law judge report bubble. And so this is kind of a separate but related process that's happening at the same time as this environmental review with the Public Utilities Commission. So all of this information, the administrative law judge, which is just like a regular judge, but they look they only look at like agency decisions, so DNR or the Public Utilities Commission. So the AELJ will look at all of this information from the EIS and from the public comments, and then give a report to the Public Utilities Commission saying, this is what I think you should do, given all the information I have. That goes along with all the comments to the Public Utilities Commission. And then finally, we're here where the commission will meet and issue a permit decision. A lot of information, but this lovely visual is also in the draft environmental impact statement as well. So what is a DEIS? Again, that's a draft environmental impact statement, and it's the PUC's first attempt at characterizing all of the potential environmental, social, economic, and other impacts of the proposed project. And again, it's based on that scoping document that says what the environmental review has to cover. So right now, that means there's a public opportunity for comment through February 23rd at 4:30 p.m. I do not know why the PUC decided 4:30 p.m. is the time at which all comments need to come in, but that's what they've said. So the public meetings, as I said, there's today, tomorrow, and Thursday. So today it will be at Breckenridge High School from 6 to 9 p.m. Tomorrow it's at the Fergus Falls Big Woods Event Center, 1 to 4 p.m. and 6 to 9 p.m. And then Thursday it's virtual, also from 6 to 9 p.m. And there's a link in here. We can also probably throw that in the chat and make it available to you other places if you need it. So what we all came here today for is what's in Summit's DEIS. So you might notice first that there are actually 3 routes that the DEIS is looking at. It's RA, which stands for Route Alternative North, RA Hybrid, and RA South. So starting with RA South, that's this black one down here. And that's what Summit originally submitted to the Public Utilities Commission. They said, this is our preferred route, starting at the ethanol plant, that star, and heading towards the North Dakota border south of Breckenridge. Here also put in suggestions for Route Alternative North and Route Alternative Hybrid. And kind of having looked at a lot of what Summit had here, we noticed like right here, especially this kind of water body here, there's a lot of wetlands. And there's a unit called Orwell 9 that could have some good habitat for rare species and just has some high ecological value. So we said, what if you just went straight west and offered 2 suggestions that the PUC should also consider. So that's what they're looking at. They're looking at all 3 routes. What are the economic, environmental, social, and other impacts of each route? But they're also looking at alternatives to the technology itself, or the end goal itself. So the end goal that Summit has said is to lower the carbon intensity of ethanol at this facility. And so some of the alternatives that they have to look at and did look at in the DEIS are energy efficiency implemented at the ethanol facility, and then also improved agricultural practices at farms that are providing the corn to the ethanol facility. And then the DEIS also has to look at what's called no action alternative. And that just means what would happen if this project was not built. Summit's DEIS also includes some very interesting appendices that I've highlighted here. So there's the Minnesota Environmental Construction Plan, interesting for folks who are concerned about obviously long-term impacts of that kind of construction. Also the Agricultural Protection Plan, similar idea. And then finally the rupture study, which I know is of high interest to especially those living along the route. So in general, Summit's DEIS, not unlike many DEISs, is pretty general, not a ton of detail at this point. So we're going to dive into some of the specific topics that in reviewing CURE found interesting, concerning, lacking, whatever word you want to use. So first is water use. Unfortunately, it's not quite clear how much Summit anticipates using for construction. They offered a couple estimates, but there's also a sentence in the DEIS that says, it might be this, but we have yet to really solidify what that amount will be. And then for operation needs, Summit is estimating that it will need 13 million gallons annually. For water quality, there are a couple of things that caught our eye. So first, RA South, which is again Summit's preferred route, crosses a surficial beach ridge aquifer in Otter Tail County. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not entirely certain what a surficial beach ridge aquifer is, but I do know that we need our aquifers to be healthy and not breached. And the DNR wrote in some early comments that given the features of this area in Otter Tail County, they were concerned that there was the risk of an aquifer breach during the construction of this kind of pipeline. And then there's also the potential, the summit has said it will use horizontal directional drilling or HDD methods especially when crossing like large water bodies. But this type of drilling can result in the drilling fluid being released into waterways, which is not what we want. For wetlands, there's some inconsistencies in how the DEIS measures acres of wetland potentially impacted, which is a concern. We need to know how many or how much of our wetlands might be impacted, both short-term and long-term, by this kind of construction and the operation of the pipeline. For land, the DEIS kind of says that there are going to be short-term impacts to agricultural lands, but that really ignores a lot of the anecdotal stories that we've heard, especially along Line 3, and also studies that have been done about these long-term impacts of pipeline construction, more than 2 to 3 years. And then for safety, there's no clear information about the measures Summit's going to take to protect those living along the route in the event of a rupture. So they've said that they will provide a CO2 monitor for those living within 1,000 feet of the pipeline. But in the rupture report in Appendix G, it also notes that, in the event of a catastrophic rupture, the effects would be pretty much immediate for that potential impact radius zone. And so folks living within that space it's going to happen too fast for that monitor to really be effective. And then kind of along the same lines, there's really no consideration in the DEIS of potential setback requirements. So more of what's in there. In terms of environmental justice, it does not consider the burden that this type of project is placing on rural communities to host this infrastructure. There is, like with a lot of infrastructure, the potential for a leak or a rupture, and we're asking rural communities to take that on. There's also no discussion of potential for trafficking, which is especially concerning given previous experience with a lot of pipeline construction, but also the location near the state border. This is a section that's about 20 to 30 miles, depending on which route. And so it's very close to North Dakota. For air quality and GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, the DEIS incorrectly assumes, without providing any support, that all of the CO2 captured from the facility, which is also assuming all of it will be captured, that any of the CO2 captured will be permanently stored. We have no assurances of that. And so it's very concerning to just assume that it will all be taken care of. The lifetime of the project, the stated lifetime of the project is 25 years. So that really brings up a question of what happens to the ethanol facility's CO2 after that. Is it just going to go back to operating as normal? And if so, has that really created this type of air quality and GHG or climate benefit? Enhanced oil recovery. So some of you might have heard us on different webinars, but oftentimes CO2 is used in depleted oil wells and to get more of that oil up in a process called enhanced oil recovery. And Summit has said that they won't be using the captured CO2 for EOR publicly, but there's no discussion of Summit's ability to sell CO2 to others for use in EOR, which in the hearings in Iowa at the Iowa Utilities Board, we found out is a very real possibility. There is some amount of CO2 that they will keep available to sell for others to use in whatever way they see fit. For wildlife and vegetation, there's a limited discussion of impacts on wildlife and vegetation, especially in the instance of a pipeline rupture. The DEIS kind of just assumes that all animals will move away. But to bring it back to the point about the rupture study in Appendix G, in the event of a catastrophic rupture, that's going to happen pretty instantaneously. And so I don't know of many critters that can move that fast. And then finally, cumulative impacts. DEIS, despite all the things that we have said to the PUC previously, does not consider the remaining 200 plus miles of the pipeline planned for Minnesota. So this is just kind of a short overview of what's in the DEIS. It's a 356-page document, so there's a lot more information, but these are kind of the high-level issues CURE has identified. So just, I think a lot of you already know how to write a good comment, but we really want you, if you're interested in making a comment, make it personal. Describe yourself and why you're caring about the issue. You don't have to live there necessarily to care. You might have friends or family. You might care about the environment. You might like to fish or hunt or do whatever up in this area. You might live along the other parts of the route and want to weigh in here. But importantly, you want to answer the question. And in this instance, the question is, what information needs to be clarified or included in the draft EIS to ensure that the final EIS is complete and accurate? So it can be frustrating, but the question at this point is not whether the project should be approved. It's whether the DEIS has adequately described the potential environmental, social, economic, and other impacts of the proposed project. All that said, don't totally limit yourself. If there's something that isn't appearing in the DEIS that you think is missing or that's important to you, put that in your comment. You know, at its most basic level, this is a public comment period. So it's your chance to be heard and you should use it. Whoops, too far. Okay, so this is just how to submit a comment. Lots of different ways. It's in the notice as well, but kind of the 3 easiest ways: online with the Department of Commerce. We can make these links available too. You just click submit a public comment and write your text in the box, or you can write it in a separate Word document or PDF and attach that as a document. If you, like me, take some time to put your thoughts together. You can also email Andrew Levi. He works at the Department of Commerce and is on this particular docket. You'll just want to include draft EIS comment 22422, which is the docket number or how they track this issue in the subject line. And then finally, we've got on CURE's website, we created a really easy comment tool for folks to use, which I can show you in just a minute if there's interest. So just a couple things to remember: include the docket number in your submission. That's docket number 22-422, and submit your comment by Friday, February 23rd at 4:30. This is not one of those instances where, you know, if you're a little late, it might be okay. This is definitely something you want to get in by that time. And then just generally how to stay involved. Keep informed with CURE. There's our website, our Facebook, engage in the regulatory process. You can subscribe to the summit docket if you would like, and then also get the word out. So let your network and members for our organizational friends know about the comment opportunity in the public meetings. That is all. It was a very quick presentation. And that is about it. I do want to say we forgot to let our lovely friends at MCEA introduce themselves. So sorry. But they are helping us out kind of on this front because it's a big project. So thank you very much to them, Abigail and Amelia.
So do we have any questions from anybody about the project?
Sarah, there was a question about the pipelines operating as a common carrier, and I tried to answer that by saying they're not seeking that in Minnesota. Is that your understanding as well?
That is for now, yes. Yeah, so we're one of the more unique states in that we don't have that same current threat of eminent domain that applies, especially like in Iowa. So yeah, that's also my understanding.
And then also we did invite Amelia from MCEA to come and speak in this meeting. So I don't know if Amelia wanted to respond or give her take on it. MCEA and CURE have both intervened as parties in the case. So we're both participating on the same level as the applicant or the government in these proceedings. So I would invite Amelia to introduce herself and say whatever she'd like if that's your thing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amelia Voss. I'm the climate director at MCEA, Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. I think Sarah covered this really nicely. We've been focused especially on how they're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions from the project because our research has shown that it's impossible to capture 100% of carbon emissions using a carbon capture system. And so that's an angle that I'm very interested in looking at. And comments on this DEIS, you know, they just assume with certainty that 100% of the carbon dioxide emissions will be captured. I have yet to see that be done anyplace else. The pilot projects that have piloted carbon capture technology have had nowhere near that success rate. So I'm not sure how, what the basis is for this confidence that this technology is going to work and capture 100% of the CO2 emissions. And I think that, is a foundational piece underlying the premise that this has some kind of climate benefit and aligns with the climate action framework that the state has passed and things like that. So that's something that I'm interested in diving into a little bit more. And I actually have a question as I was thinking about this for the CURE team. It's something that I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm wondering if you think the PUC has, the Public Utilities Commission has any authority to include a limitation in a route permit that they cannot use the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. It's a tricky legal question. So if you have any thoughts about that, I'd be curious to hear it.
Hudson looks ready.
I don't know if I'm ready, but it's a fun discussion. So I think we have thought a lot about what Minnesota's ability is to do something like that. And the problem is that it is very clearly a constraint on interstate trade. So if you build a pipeline network and you say you can only use the pipeline inside my state if you use the stuff in the pipeline for specific things in another state, you are getting yourself lined up for a pretty good lawsuit under the federal constitution. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done if it was well structured, but you would want to be very careful about how you did it. And the best way to do it would be to route the pipeline so it could not go to the place where enhanced oil recovery happens. But unfortunately, North Dakota is a place where enhanced oil recovery happens. There is a case where North Dakota, and I'm sure Amelia knows this, but for everybody else, there is a case where North Dakota sued Minnesota for a previous climate change law that we had that basically would have said that you could not pump coal-fired power into the Minnesota grid. North Dakota did win that lawsuit, but in a very confusing court decision with 3 different opinions that doesn't make any sense. So although it is the case that North Dakota has won that kind of lawsuit before, it's not clear how they would win it a second time. So long story short, if you allow a pipeline to be built into North Dakota, it is very hard to put a condition on the use of that CO2. And as a result, it's a logical thing to assume that it will be used for EOR, since 99% of all captured carbon has been used for EOR. And it is a necessity of a real environmental review to assume that this will be used for EOR. So to the extent that the EIS doesn't really have a good analysis of how it's going to be used for enhanced oil recovery in North Dakota, that would be a flaw in the EIS, I would say. How's that for a long answer?
It was good. I just thought everything you said is a perfect justification for why the final EIS has to look at an alternative scenario where this CO2 is used for enhanced oil recovery and what the climate implications and other implications are of that. Like that's a perfect setup for that. So I'll be including that in my comment for sure.
So Amelia, I would also just add a couple things. I think Summit has been really crafty in how that they've set up this project and have different business entities responsible for different portions of the actual project. So they've said in public meetings that the ethanol plant explicitly owns the CO2 until it goes to the fence line, and then it gets in the pipeline, and then Summit owns it. And then once Summit brings it to the sequestering site and it goes into that specific feature, they no longer own it. And so they've been really specific about how they've broken it up and how they're explaining it publicly. The same goes to the point of your question about capturing all the CO2. They're really clever in how they explain that the industry itself explains that capturing CO2 in a fermenting vat gives you 100% security of capturing the CO2 because it's in a contained space, but they don't talk about the potential release when it leaves that specific portion of the facility and is moving into pipes and going into other valves and going into the compression stations and being distilled. It just talks about the capturing of it in the four walls and ceiling and roof, which technically they're probably have a higher rate of being accurate about that, but they don't quantify that through the whole process. They just quantify it in the vat of capturing the CO2. Does that make sense? So I can see that there are a few folks on here that maybe aren't with agencies or nonprofits, that might be individual landowners. And I saw Kay's comment in the chat about, will this be available? So Kay, we're recording this and this will be posted on the carbonpipelinesmn.org website. And so you'll be able to use the recording if you'd like to share it with people in your network. And then we'll also be emailing out the link that has the comment form in it. It's on our website. For those of you who weren't there last night, I would just suggest that you read through the whole page and you look at the different issue areas. If you click on the blue bars on the comment form, they'll open up and they'll give you the relationship of the concern to the DEIS. I suggest that you start your comment in a Word document and you can take those issues and copy and paste them into your Word document so that you can form your comment like you would a letter. And then once you're happy with it, then you can copy and paste it back into the comment box, because the little box in the comment form, it's kind of hard to type and construct your full comment and then go back and read it and make sure that it all flows the way you want it to and that you're able to personalize it and make it your own. So that would be my one suggestion. And I would tell you that if you get the comment tool and you're struggling with it all, feel free to give me a call or any of the staff at Cure and we can help walk you through that. I see that Kay has a question.
Yeah, somebody, whoops, gotta move my tape, asked about trafficking, and I'm assuming they meant sexual trafficking, like happened up at line 3 so badly. Somebody want to address what that person asked?
Yeah, yep. I sent a great link to, it's just unfortunately one example of what happened on line 3. But so in line 3 with the kind of throughout the environmental review process, there was at least one comment that was brought up saying, hey, this should be on your radar. And I was not part of line 3. I was still in school. So I don't know particularly what the PUC or the relevant agencies kind of did with that. But, unfortunately, it clearly wasn't taken seriously enough because there were issues throughout line 3 with sex trafficking. Sorry, Kay, go ahead.
So are they going, I bet the EIS did not address, the construction camps and the chaos that they create in the communities where they're located? Because it seems like they always bring in a whole bunch of people from out of state. They don't really hire people locally.
Yep. Yeah. So that's an interesting point because I think the DEIS set is, as I alluded to, is only looking at the Otter Tail-Wilkin part of the pipeline. And so it's only the 28 miles in Minnesota. And so the DEIS doesn't consider anything like, I'm going to put in the comments, called so-called man camps. It doesn't discuss that whatsoever. But it does say that I think they anticipate about 250 folks being hired for the construction process. But I, again, am saying that that's just for the 28 miles to North Dakota. There will be people right on the other side, maybe the same people, we don't know. But it continues into North Dakota. It's not just a one state, one location issue. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Kay.
So one of the things that Sarah did speak about and what we have talked about is Summit has only proposed this 28-mile portion of the route. And one of the things you can comment on is your concern about the fact that there are cumulative impacts potentially going to impact the other 220-ish or 200 miles of the proposed route that Summit has been contracting or purchasing easements for almost 2 years now, has easements contracted in all 11 counties, and question the fact as to why the PUC is only, or why the PUC is allowing Summit to break up the project, because they should really not be allowing that. And we did address that with the PUC, and they disregarded our concern and said that they could only look at what was in front of them. But clearly, this has been on Summit's website for over 2 years. They've had the full map. It's been circulated. They are purchasing easements. So for the PUC to disregard that concern is a little unnerving. And you can certainly, if that is a concern of yours, you can certainly add that to the comment that you submit.
Thing I just was thinking about and I wanted to add is that the Department of Commerce, who prepared the draft environmental impact statement, is required by law to respond to every concern raised by people in this comment period. And so even if people just have a question, like why wasn't this included, or how do you know that this won't harm the environment if this happens, even including questions is a valuable comment, because the state agency is legally required to respond to all of them. And sometimes a question can be one of the hardest things to respond to if you come up with a good question that elicits something that they really didn't talk about. So that's something to think about too.
Thank you, Amelia.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I just wanted to say that there are public meetings this week, and 3 of them are in person, but the one on Thursday night, as Peg put in the chat, is virtual, and that would be an exceptional place to start asking questions. And I don't know that they will answer your question during the meeting. They might just say, thank you for your question, but you should ask your question. Feel free to ask your questions in the meeting. And then also feel free to submit them in writing as a DEIS comment. If you get your questions answered because you're able to attend the meeting and actually ask them their faces, all the better. But as Amelia was saying, participating in the meetings this week and submitting written questions is definitely a good way to interact with this process.
Okay.
Is there anything in the EIS about eminent domain, the probable need that not every farmer will sign, will give them permission to cross his land, and they'll want to invoke eminent domain, which is in Minnesota, we shouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, so pretty consistently, the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, has said they do not believe that eminent domain. They say that also in the DEIS. That's our understanding right now. That's about all we know right now. So like I mentioned to somebody in the chat, in response to somebody in the chat, we're not like other states in that regard. We don't immediately have that as a possibility, and hopefully never a possibility. Based on what we understand of the law. Yeah.